Good afternoon, everyone. Alison McGinley here, day 2 of Emotional Abuse Week, helping you to get some clarity around what abuse, what emotional abuse or psychological abuse really can look like in our lives. Because why? Well, because it's not as radical as we're often led to believe. You know, at the moment there is this movement where we're all trying to identify, we're all trying to label ourselves. He's a narcissist, she's a narcissist, I'm an empath, I'm this, I'm that. Hi, Wendy, thank you for joining. And so this training this week is really about getting clear about your own personal situation, our own personal situation, because I think it's really, really dangerous to ignore that real base level emotional abuse that happens so often in our everyday life. It's such a part of our society. It's such a part of our day-to-day interaction with people that often we don't realise. We just don't realise that it is abuse, and it's only when you start again. It's only when you're confronted with this huge emotional abuse that comes out of narcissism or pathology or some such thing, that you maybe sit up and say, oh, wait a minute, yeah, how could she not have seen that? But the problem is that we're so used to it, working on a low level in our everyday lives, that we don't spot it. We don't spot it when it's happening to us and other people, and we don't spot it when we're doing it to other people. And that's what this week is about. We're going to be talking about all the big terms that you've heard already, that we tend to identify with a much more serious narcissistic type of abuse. But I'm going to bring it down to our everyday level. I'm not very good at making things complicated, therefore I have to keep it simple. So I really want to give you just a few day-to-day examples that you might be able to recognise in either your behaviour towards others or their behaviour towards you. And if you have an aha moment and you say, shit, that's me, great. We're human, we all have it. The reason I'm here doing this is because during the course of my journey, the course of my uncovering who I am, I discovered an awful lot of these unhealthy patterns that I'd picked up. Along the way. That's how I saw the grown-ups round about me interacting. Hold on a second. Can you tell Olivia to be quiet, please, or close the door that I'm doing a video, and ask her to stop shouting? Thanks. So yeah, I picked these behaviours up. I didn't know any better. So when it came my turn to have grown-up serious relationships, and that be romantic or friendships or work relationships, I hadn't ever learned how to address problems. I learned how to face, confront situations. So I resorted to a lot of the patterns that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And it's only with knowledge that that's what I was doing, that I was able to say, it's no wonder my relationships were always difficult. It's no wonder people were always slightly wary of me, or that I was always on the back foot. Once I could do that, I could make a change. I could change something about the way I behaved. So, as I say, if you have one of those, shit, I think that's me, don't worry. It's a great place to be. If you don't know, you can't change it. If we know, we've got a possibility of recreating those patterns, becoming aware of the patterns, and make them conscious patterns, and make them work to create rather than break relationships. So with that in mind, I popped something in the group earlier today, and I think it read something along the lines of, if you think you're being abused, or if you think you're being mistreated, then you probably are. And that's what, that is what I want to really impart this week. That's what this is all about. It's about going back to ourselves. It's about getting used to looking inwards and saying, okay, I'm going to trust what I'm feeling. If it doesn't feel good, then it's probably not good for me. If I feel, the reason that I say this is so often I have clients, I even have girlfriends sometimes, to be perfectly honest, saying, is this okay behaviour? Because after a certain period of time of a certain type of behavior or any type of behavior, it becomes normal. It becomes absolutely normal. So it's very difficult for us to identify it as anything other than normal. However, from an outsider's perspective, it's completely not. It's not good. It's not right. It's not healthy. It's not it's not the way that we want to conduct relationships. It's not the way that we want to be treated. But it's very difficult to identify that for yourself when you're in the midst of it and it's been going on for any period of time. So what I would say is stop, ask yourself, does it feel good? If it doesn't feel good, then it's probably an unhealthy pattern. Doesn't mean, when I talk about unhealthy patterns, it doesn't mean that they can't be changed, especially if we're the perpetrators. Also, if we're on the receiving end, and I'll be talking about that later in the week, what you can do when you are on the receiving end of somebody else's emotional abuse or psychological abuse, how you put your boundaries in place and how you can step out of the circle so that the interaction has to change. But for today, I wanted to give some time over to what it feels like to be in that place, to be in the place of not being comfortable with the way somebody's treating you. Now, this group is often, is pretty much about romantic relationships, but we're not always, it can be any relationship at all. We don't need to narrow it down for this training to romantic relationships. Let's just think of, if you're here, if you're listening, if you're watching on replay, it's because something about this topic has hit a chord with you. So think about that person or those people in your life that make you question, is this emotional abuse? Am I being psychologically manipulated? Now, again, why do people do that? There are two reasons. One is to have control over your mind. And that's a very conscious thing. They do it knowingly to put you in a position where you start to question yourself. You start to think that you're going mad. You start to take the blame for everything that's happening on yourself. It erodes your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-belief, and it makes you feel pretty useless. Now, that one part of that is it's done on purpose. It's consciously done, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about narcissism and sociopaths and all this genre of person. They are doing it to get a specific result, and that specific result is to control you and to make you think that you're the problem. But on the other side of it, exactly the same behaviours can be running in a completely subconscious level, as they were in my case. I wasn't aware that what I was doing was psychologically damaging to myself or to anyone else. It's completely subconscious. It's a pattern. It's the only way that you know how to behave. It's the only tool, or they are the only tools that you have in your toolbox. This is it. This is what you saw. This is what you picked up. It feels comfortable because you don't know any different. Maybe, and certainly, again, I'm talking from my own experience, maybe you have a feeling, this doesn't feel good when I'm doing this. I know that I'm getting it wrong. I know that that there's something about this that isn't right, but you don't have any other way of behaving. That whether you're on the receiving or the giving end of it, it's completely unconscious. It's not malicious in its intent by any stretch of the imagination, but the result is pretty much similar. The result causes lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem, lack of self-belief, and complete self-doubt on the part of the other person. An example, gaslighting. It's a huge, big term, and it can be, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to minimize when I'm talking about this. I'm not minimizing the devastation that it can cause, but I'm trying to bring it down to what is the normal level, the one that we will all recognize in our lives. If you do recognize it on a grander scheme, let me know and we can talk, and I can put you, it's not my expertise, but I know people who work specifically with people suffering trauma caused by narcissism, and I can put you in touch. But going back to where we are, so gaslighting, what is it? It's a way of manipulating your thoughts and making you question what you know is true. So again, going back to what I said at the very beginning, if it doesn't feel good, then it isn't good. If you're wondering if it's emotional abuse or any sort of abuse, then it probably is. Just like anything in the world, if you're wondering if you have a problem with it, you probably do. So it can show up, gaslighting particularly. You have an argument, for instance, you have an argument with your partner, with your mother. This happened a lot with my mother. We would have an argument. I would say X, Y, and Z. She would come back at me and she would tell me A, B, and C. And she would be very hurtful, because she could be very, very malicious. She'd be very hurtful, and I would shrink, and I would, finish the conversation and I'd disappear. And then when I kind of gathered myself together and I would go back into the conversation, and I would say, you really hurt me, or I was really hurt when you said. And I know that this, as I went on, I learned how to approach it. I used to say, you really hurt me. Then I learned, don't make it about them, talk about you from your own perspective. So I would say, I was really hurt when you said X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C. And she would flat deny it. She would absolutely flatly deny it, that she'd ever said that the conversation had ever taken that turn. And then she would throw it back on me and make me think, am I just too sensitive? Did I hear something that didn't happen? God, I always get it wrong with her. God, it's always... And then I would start to go into a spiral of self-questioning, self-doubt, and disbelief. And because, of course, I had had a relationship with her for such a long time, I had been nurtured and cajoled and manipulated into always believing her story as opposed to my gut feeling. It was later that I could say, nah, I know I'm right. That in its essence is gaslighting. She didn't do it from any... There was nothing... I was going to say there's nothing malicious. Of course there was something malicious. She didn't want to take responsibility for what she said. So from that perspective, yes, it was malicious, but it wasn't done with the purpose of controlling my mind or trying to get control over me. It was done from a point of view that she didn't have the self-worth herself to be able to accept her bad behaviour. So rather than accept her bad behaviour, she pushed it back on me and made me question myself. And that's something we see so often in our relationships, in our familial relationships, our romantic relationships, that kind of dynamic. Now, it's a dynamic that I took on with my husband. I did exactly the same thing with him. He's a bit cleverer than me. He hadn't been brought up that way, so he didn't go into self-doubt and self-questioning more than on occasion. So he would come back at me and say, you're talking rubbish, that's not how it happened. And he was able to walk away from the situation. So I could never engage with him. I would give it my best shot, but he would stop me where I started, and I wouldn't get any satisfaction out of that, that way of behaving. So then what I would do next is I would do the only other thing available to me. I couldn't take responsibility at this point because I still hadn't learned those tools. I would sulk, and I'd be resentful, and I'd be so hurt that he wouldn't believe me. And it's awful. I hate saying it. I hate having to say that out loud, and I hate having to admit that I was that person. I was that person. And I couldn't do anything about being that person. I couldn't do anything about that behaviour until I knew that it was happening, until I knew that it was a pattern, until I knew that was my go-to when I felt hurt, but I didn't have the words to say, or I didn't have the courage to say what I felt for fear of being told that's not how it is. It's not like that. You shouldn't feel like that, etc., etc., because that's what I was used to. So my way of avoiding that was to do it, to go on the offensive rather than sit back on the defensive. These are very, very low level, but they are relationship destroying. Any relationship can be destroyed if we're using these kind of tactics. And these tactics aren't done for any other purpose than to protect ourselves. They're not done because we're bad people. They're not done, and I say this to make myself feel better as I'm telling you, but it's truth. So if you're on the other side of it, if you're on the receiving side of it, Of course, it's really difficult. It's really difficult when you're trying to make sense of what's happening, because your body, your gut, your heart is telling you something, but you're being told something completely different. Believe what you hear, and then question, then do ask, do I feel that this is coming from the desire to really, have a mind control, or is it a fear on this other person's part of not being good enough, of not being heard, of not having their feelings and emotions received? And when you'll know, of course you'll know, and if you don't know, jump on a call and I'll tell you. But you'll know yourself which one resonates with you most, and from there you can make a decision on on how you're going to approach it. But don't take it personally. It feels personal, of course, when somebody's telling you, no, it's not me, it's you. It's difficult not to make it personal, and that doesn't mean you shrink back and you don't say anything. That's where it comes, where you go into yourself. That's where all the work on becoming self-loving, self-accepting, self-acknowledging, that's where that work comes in, because from there you can say, okay, is it mine? No, it's not. Well, take it back. I'm not prepared to take that on as mine. And you can put your boundaries very firmly in place, and you can say, I'm not prepared to engage with you. You can even do it. I've got a client who I had to teach her to use her hand because she couldn't say it, but when she put her hand up, it had the desired result. She couldn't make her partner listen, or her husband listen to her, but when she put her hand up when she was talking, he took a step back and he recognised that as my cue to listen. So whatever works. But yeah, so if you're on the receiving end of it, what do? We take that step back. And this is something I was going to talk about later in the week, but seeing as I'm here, I may as well. And you say, I'm just not prepared to have a conversation with somebody that comes at me like this. I'm not prepared to do it. And you can walk away, you can take yourself out of the situation. Or if you're not quite strong enough to do that, you're still work in progress on that, you close your mind off to it and take yourself emotionally out of the situation, which sometimes is easier to do. So going back to some of the other identifiers that you may come across, I touched on one a second ago. Nobody can tell you how you should feel. Nobody can tell you that you should or shouldn't be feeling something. Often we do because we can't cope with somebody else being hurt or upset, or we're trying to save them from being hurt or upset. So we say things like, oh, you shouldn't feel like that, or it's not that bad, or it wasn't meant like that. And what that does is it really, especially if you're like most of us are, you're very sensitive, and you're still working to find balance within yourself, it really makes you feel, what's wrong with me? Am I feeling something that I shouldn't, that I don't deserve to feel? Is there something wrong with me to be feeling this? What is it in me? Because that's where we always go back to. We're going back to what is it in me, but from a positive, empowering place. What is it in me that I need to do not to have that reaction, as opposed to what is it in me that I feel like this? Which is taking going against yourself and taking the other person's side. So those kinds of patterns are really, are really dangerous. Again, they can be used in the big narcissistic playground, but very often they're used in everyday conversation, in everyday discussion. Another place that we can get caught up is, I've completely gone blank. I said playground, and I had this flash of kids playing in a playground, and the other side of my mind went completely blank. So what was I saying? I was narcissistic playground, emotionally. Yeah, communication. Yeah, I bang on about communication every opportunity I get. It's the place that everybody comes to and talks about, you know, the relationship. The communication is the first thing that they bring up in terms of what's going on or what's going wrong in the relationship. And something that we often talk about is that feeling of tiptoeing around, you know, walking around on eggshells, terrified that you say the wrong thing because you might inflame the other person, terrified that that the conversation you're going to have will cause a huge argument, or worse still, not being allowed to speak your truth, not being allowed to say, you're being cut down at every turn. Again, it can be seriously, you know, a serious emotional abuse issue. And if somebody is never prepared to listen to you, and somebody is always putting you down, and no matter what you say, they shut you down, then it's a different issue. But generally what happens is we're terrified of what we're going to say. We think about it and we're playing it over in our minds. And if I say this, will he react like that? Or if I say that, will she think of it from that point of view? And we think and we think and we think, and we end up, tiptoeing around. And by the time we eventually open our mouths to talk, we're so terrified of the reaction that we go into it with that pent-up fear. The other person smells it. And what do? They withdraw because they feel, the pressure of this conversation. It's not an open conversation, it's pressure. You're going in because you're terrified of it, because you're terrified of the outcome. You've already decided what the outcome's going to be in your mind. And the other person will shut you down, withdraw, tell you that what you're saying is rubbish, do anything at all to disengage in the conversation, start watching television or playing around or get very busy and have to go out. And it leaves you thinking, I'm never heard. He doesn't want to know how I'm feeling. He doesn't care about how I'm feeling. I'm not loved. I'm not heard. I'm not respected. I'm not. And again, it feels very abusive. And it is from the other point of view, it is, but not necessarily done from the point to put you down, to squidge you, to make you, to get control over you. It's done from fear. Fear, because where you're coming from is to get something, is to get something, but you're also going into it with that. It's almost like an aggressive energy that you're taking into it. You go in and you can feel it in yourself. Your voice might be breaking or wibbling, or I can't even think of the word I want, cracking as you're talking, your mouth's dry, all that kind of, when you go into a conversation like that, the other person feels it. Before you even open your mouth, they feel it, and they react to what they feel with it rather than what you're saying. So when you're saying, whatever you're saying, doesn't matter. You could be saying, you are the most wonderful, amazing person, and everything you say and everything you do is absolutely right, and I mean that 100% from my heart. But if you go in with that energy, they don't hear that. They hear, what does she want from me? What's she going to get from me? I don't want another argument. I can't do another argument. I'm sick of walking on eggshells. And they go off into their own story and they push you away, or they deny your feelings. And that, that is, again, it's a pattern. It's a pattern of behaviour, but it feels abusive. It feels heavy. It feels like a game that you're playing with each other. My favourite, because it's what I was. The passive aggressive. The passive aggressive is emotional abuse. Whichever way we look at it, how does it come out? Well, it can come out in any way. I gave you an example of my behaviour before, sulking. I don't know what to say, and I'm hoping if I just sit quietly with my arms folded, staring up at the sky or rolling my eyes, you'll ask me. You'll ask me what's going on. You'll be interested enough, and you'll keep pushing me until I have the confidence to tell you. That was my thinking. But how does that come across from the other side? What does my husband or any of my, don't do it with my girlfriends now, but when I was younger with my girlfriends, how does that come across? They withdraw. They don't want anything to do with it. They get angry. They're just not interested. If you're not grown up enough to tell me, then I'm not really interested in being here. So they push me away. And how do I feel then? I feel rejected. I feel completely rejected. And then I go back into the story that got me to sitting with my arms folded, rolling my eyes, hoping that somebody's going to notice that I'm upset or I'm hurt in the first place. And then I justify why I feel all these things. And then I go back into self-loathing. And on the other side of it, I'm now resenting, as well as loathing myself, I'm resenting the other person. And then I get vitriolic, and I make those underhand little comments. And the other person is there saying, look, tell me. Or you make the pointed remarks, little pointed remarks here, little pointed remarks there. And it's horrible when you're on the receiving end of that. It's horrible to be, to get those, and something's happening, and you say, sorry, do you want to talk about it? You want to tell me what this is? Nothing. What are you talking about? Nothing. Everything's fine. You think, there's nowhere to go with it. There is absolutely nowhere to go with it. You if you're on the receiving end, you're in your own head saying, but am I imagining this? What did I do? What have I done? Racking your brains. She's telling me there's nothing wrong. I feel like there is. And then for an easy life, what do? We choose to believe that there's nothing wrong, which inflames the other person and makes us and leaves us in self-doubt again. So these are kind of a few of the patterns of behavior that we will see on that sort of low level, day in, day out, emotional abuse. Now, the reason it's so difficult, and the reason I want to talk about it is it's so much a part of our daily life. It's so much a part of what we saw, what we were brought up with, what we see going on round about us in the workplace, in the home, in the church, everywhere. Everywhere we look, people have picked up these patterns, and they're working on them. So we're not always aware that they're there, and we're certainly not aware that they're causing damage. But again, the reason that I wanted to bring this up is because I read a report last week. One of the biggest problems and one of the biggest causes of divorce, of course, it's communication, but when they broke it down again, the communication was this passive-aggressive emotional abuse. That's the biggest cause of relationship breakdown. And it's so, if you don't know it's happening, you can't change it. If you do know what's happening, you have a choice. Now, unfortunately, we have a choice because we're here watching this. We have a choice. We can decide we're going to change something or we're not going to change something. When you pop on, say hello so I know who's seen it and who hasn't seen it. Because it tells me here that Wendy and Kim joined, but I don't know who's here at the moment. So just give me a little hello so I can say hello back. So yeah, the problem is we're doing this, and it's going to raise your awareness rather, so that you can say, okay, this is what's happening. This is it, and I can take action to make it different. But what we can't ever do is we can't ever change anybody else. We can't ever change. So if you're on the receiving end of it, it's going to be a case of working with yourself, becoming strong in yourself, so that then you decide, yeah, I can put up with this as long as I've got my boundaries in place. Or, you know what, if it doesn't change, I'm off. I'm not prepared to live like this anymore. But you don't know that until you've done this work, until you've built yourself up. If you're on the giving end, and I'm sure, if you're completely honest with yourself, at least in some of your relationships, at some time you will be, because we all are. We all fall into that pattern at some point. Then awareness means that you can do something to change it. What I've dropped into the group a couple of, and maybe you've read them already because I've shared them before, a couple of blogs that I wrote. One, identifying emotion, what gaslighting is, how it feels, what to look out for, And another one too that's much more general. It's about identifying emotional abuse, identifying that thing that I was talking about right at the beginning. Is this a problem? It doesn't feel good. Well, most likely it isn't. So it will just give you a list of the sort of indicators, identifiers, if you like, to show where your problems may lie. Does anyone have any questions? I talked a lot. I wanted to keep these as close to 30 minutes as possible because I don't want to make it so heavy that you don't get a chance to listen to all, or time is precious. So I will close up today. If you have any questions, drop them in now. If not, what I'm going to do is, or what I've said already, what I said yesterday, if you saw yesterday's post, is on Sunday, I'm going to do a question and answer session. Now, if enough of you are interested, what I will do is I'll set up a Zoom call so we can jump on together. We can put it into the group at the same time, but we can actually be there physically together on the computer, and we can have a conversation and you can ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, or you can't make it because it's Sunday and life happens, put a hashtag question into the group and just ask your question there, and that way I can gather up any questions that come up during the course of the week. And if you're very shy and you don't want to do that, message me with your questions. You've been thinking about them a lot. And what have you come up with? Did you have any aha moments, Wendy? Because it's something that for me, I think you've disappeared now. Oh no, you're back. I think it's something that when we start thinking about it, when we become aware of it, we become super aware of it. And I think, when you make any change to your behaviour, whether it's stopping somebody treating you in that way, or whether it's on the other side of it, changing your behaviour, it seems to be overwhelming. It takes up all of your space, and everywhere you look, you see it for the longest time. We can talk about it if you want. You can book a call and we can have a chat about it. Or if you want to just send me a message, then I can answer it that way. Entirely up to you. Because the one thing that I know more than anything is inside doesn't resolve it. We need to get it out. And it's never, ever as bad when we get it out. It's never as bad as it is when it's playing about in our mind. Because in our mind, we create stories, and each time the stories get bigger and bigger and bigger. An example of that is when you're going to have that conversation. You've decided you want to have that conversation with somebody, and you're playing it over in your head. And if I say this, and should I use that word? And the more you think about it, and the more you work on it, and the more time you spend on it, the bigger the problem gets, and the more you're convinced of the negative outcome on the other side. And of course, the more you're convincing yourself of the negative outcome, the more anxiety you take into the conversation, the more the other person picks up on it, and the more likely you are to fulfill your nasty thinking. I haven't had a coffee for hours. Fulfill that prophecy that you have in your head. So it's exactly the same thing with this. Don't keep it in. We're all the same. We're all the same. We're all doing the best we can. We all have, we've all made mistakes right, left and centre, but not because we're bad, because we didn't know any better. We didn't have any other tools available in that moment. Once we get to the point that we can accept exactly what is, that's when the change comes. So don't beat yourself up. Don't feel bad about it. Don't, just accept what is, and then we can change it. So with that, any other questions, pop them into the group here, #question, either under here or anywhere else in the group will do, or message me if you're a shy girl, and I'll get back to you. I'm going to have to go. I've got a client at 5 o'clock and I need to drink coffee or she'll get nothing of me at all. I'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm dedicating it purely to passive aggressive behaviour, received and given. And I'll share a couple of ideas on how you can actually start to make the change there. So do join me for that if you can. And yeah, have a lovely Tuesday. Have a lovely rest of the day. And yeah, that's it. I'll go. Speak to you soon. Bye. Mwah.